Much for joining me on Grants for Small Businesses, our webinar today. My name is Kristy Bailey. I am an advisor and a presenter for Business Station on behalf of the Digital Solutions Program. I also have managed and own my own businesses, many of which I have had to apply for grant funding for, and have also successfully won and received grant funding for a number of other businesses that I've helped. So what we're going to go through today is based on real life experience in terms for applying for and winning grants and grant funding. We'll talk about some of the key information on why funding exists and how you can maximise your efforts essentially to get grants and to be successful in this space. The webinar today is designed to be interactive, so please do use the Q&A functionality or the chat box to ask questions at any time. Also keep in mind that I'm going to stay on for a few minutes at the end to allow time for questions as well. All right, so looking at grants and other support. Well, most grants are available from state governments. There's also grants that are available at a federal level. Now, government grants are generally for specific projects, so not business in general. It's normally project-based. So you'll need a specific plan to be eligible for grant funding, not just a general and vague sort of business idea. Now, there's a few grants that are specifically for starting a business, but there are grants for business activities like expansion, training. There's a lot around research and development, as well as importing and exporting goods and commercialising a specific product, plus a lot more. Now, the government also offers a lot of free and low-cost business advisory services like the one that you're taking advantage of now. There's also financial and tax advice available. There's loans that are government supported and other support. So a lot of the government assistance does take form of cheap loans, networking, coaching, mentoring, and they are considered government assistance basically, and can be even more important to you as a startup or a new business than winning grant money, because it's that ongoing support. They also exist so that businesses can achieve the government's economic and social policies, and those key policies are really a thriving economy. To reduce unemployment is always a major factor, and to build stronger communities. So essentially the support is going to allow you to carry out these functions that the government needs to make the economy function well. So make sure that your business is a part of that. Now, before you start looking at opportunities, you'll need to determine if you're grant ready. Grant success is directly correlated to business success. So you have to have a strong business plan and a strong strategy in place to make sure that you can really effectively answer a lot of the application questions. So to answer those questions, you absolutely have to have an intimate knowledge of your business plan and have a formed and a detailed marketing strategy around that. You have to know how that strategy is going to be implemented and make sure that you have the resources to be able to implement it. And you have to have developed a really clear understanding of and some proven research on how this strategy of whatever the specific project is going to succeed. So the value of a grant is how it enables business success. So that true test of your strategy is that it will deliver those specific outcomes that are dictated by the grant. Now, each type of funding and assistance will have specific outcomes. So we'll talk a lot about that as we go through today. All right, what do you actually need before you can even think about applying for a grant? Well, first of all, you have to have an ABN. You have to be operating in the state that is providing the grant. So some of them are federal, like I said, but some of them are state-based. So you have to be operating in that particular state. That sort of does come down to a lot of the time where your business is registered as well. So keep that in mind. If you operate across multiple states, and I have seen this before in some grant funding that I've applied for bigger businesses that had a head office in one state, but then operated in various locations, you know, that can be a little bit of an issue. So you have to consider that. You obviously have to have any relevant licenses and approvals to undergo the project or to do what you're saying you'll do, or you have to have a clear pathway on how you can get them, that they exist, and you will be able to carry out the project. You have to have a really defined target market. You have to know exactly who it is that's going to purchase your product or service and who your customers are going to be. And a lot of the times in the case of matched funding, you'll have to have proof of that matched funding. So you'll have to clearly demonstrate how your contribution is going to be made. Now, what the funding is actually for really varies, but grants are widely used to achieve those government policy objectives that I mentioned. So it does involve the payment of billions of dollars each year to the non-government sector to make sure that small businesses like yours are carrying out some of those key roles. Now, each year, billions of dollars worth of grants benefit the public from the federal government through increased social services, expanded opportunities for businesses, sometimes emergency relief, which you see a lot of, with it, whether there's fires, floods, cyclones, that kind of thing, and obviously most recently COVID, and in the research and innovation space as well. But depending on where the funding is coming from, these objectives are going to really greatly vary. In all cases, realistic projects with that strong and dedicated backing have the highest likelihood of success. Some main considerations when you're deciding to submit an application: make sure you consider if you have the financial capacity. So keep in mind, a lot of grants, most of them are in fact matched funding. So do you have that financial capacity? Also, do you have the resources to actually deliver the project? So having a great strategy and a business plan and match funding is fantastic, but do you actually have the resources to carry out the project, or can you get those resources? So the next element is having a look at the strategy behind the project, and is the project consistent with your overall business strategy as well? So is there a direct alignment there? So it's not something that's just completely left of field that you don't have the experience in. Do you have the resources that are required to complete the application in the first instance? And the biggest resource in terms of completing a grant application is really time. So making sure that you dedicate enough time to the application process. And also the eligibility. So does your business actually meet the eligibility requirements? Now, they will differ and there'll be specific eligibility depending on what the funding is. Obviously, you have to weigh up the risks and the opportunity and make sure that the opportunity does outweigh the risk or the time that it's going to cost you, or that you're going to have to invest in the application process alone. Now, from a pre-application perspective, once you've found a suitable grant and then you start to look into it further, you have to decide if you're going to apply. And to help you make that decision, there's a few considerations. First of all, the eligibility criteria, which I've touched on. You just have to make sure that your business meets that criteria. That will include determining what type of organisation the funding body is looking to fund as well. So making sure that you've got the right corporate structure. You have to have a thorough read of the guidelines, the process requirements, as well as all the application forms. I would do that in advance so that you can have a good look and see if there's going to be any areas that you can't answer or any blockages at that point. Absolutely make use of the supporting information, download it all. There'll be things like terms and conditions, there'll be frequently asked questions, there'll be application tips. So if you thoroughly read that information, it will give you a really good baseline to sort of start from. You have to determine what the funding body is looking to achieve. So what are their objectives, and making sure that your project can satisfy those objectives. So you'll keep referring back to those objectives throughout this process of applying, essentially. You should also ask questions or seek clarification from the funding body. Generally, there's a period of time in which you can actually go through and ask questions. So make sure that you make use of that time. It's really important, and how you interpret. You might read a question, interpret a certain way at that period of time, or if you're within that period of time, you can ask a question just to clarify if how you understood the question is actually, how the government has written it. So those kind of periods of time are really important. If you miss that, you'll just have to make your own decisions and not have anyone to balance that off. So keep that in mind. Also, attend any briefing or information sessions that the funding body may have on the particular grant funding. The verbal info that they'll give you is really crucial. Plus, there might be other people that ask questions. So those other applicants might have thought of things that you haven't thought of yet. So I think bouncing ideas and listening to what kind of questions people have can really greatly help you. Generally, after that period of time where people can ask questions, and after there's been briefing sessions, they'll bring out another document that's like an FAQ sort of document that has answers to the questions that people have raised. So keep an eye out for subsequent supporting information as well, because it can come out at various stages throughout the application timeframe. All right, so preparation is key. You'll have to make sure that you are well and truly prepared for the application process. Now, some things that you'll need to take into consideration here are the key thing is time. You'll have to allocate sufficient time. Grant applications do take a lot of time. Don't expect that you can do it last minute, and don't attempt to do it last minute. Make sure that you're giving yourself adequate time to actually get through it. Also look at treating the process as a project in its own right, and have a bit of a team approach to it. I would absolutely get whoever the key staff are involved in your business together, have a bit of a brainstorm and get input from other team members as to what your thoughts are with the project, what you think will work. And really having that team approach, getting everyone on board, means that they'll be a lot more likely to give you information as and when you need it. But they may have some great ideas that you hadn't considered that will really help the overall project and the overall submission. Also identify other people that you'll require to have input into the application. So who's going to do what? There should be the plan and strategy development. Then there might be document design and the actual overall presentation of your application. You might need a document writer to pull it all together and write the specific answers, or someone that's collating information from various people within the organisation. A lot of the time you will also require your bookkeeper or accountant to have input. Now that could be as simple as, providing you with statements and other financial information, or it could be that you need to make changes to company structures and that kind of thing. So absolutely keep in mind that there'll be many people that should have involvement in this application. Definitely keep good records of all of the information that's required, and then set deadlines for anyone that's doing anything on behalf of this project as well. So if there's anyone that's involved in a key part of the process, including making deadlines for yourself, but make sure that there's clear milestones that you each have to reach to get to the end of this application process. All right, the information gathering stage is a key part of the application process. I've just touched on it, but there will be a lot of documents that you might need that will take time to get. So you might have to request them, like I was saying earlier, from a bookkeeper or an accountant or some other third party. So this info gathering may not be hard work as such, but you don't want to get caught out last minute trying to put the pressure on other people to get things that you could have given them ample notice to give you. So gather your internal and external inputs very early in the process. Collate the information that you require. Keep in mind, it could include things like your legal info, so corporate details. It could be insurances, like certificates of currency. There could be ASIC and business name, registration certificates and documents. There might be referees or written testimonials that you need to obtain. Brochures or any other marketing literature, your marketing plan, your business plan. There might be policies, procedures, work instructions, ISO certifications. There could be licenses or permits, your CVs of yourself or other key personnel that will be carrying out the project. Also, a proposed budget will be required. So a really solid plan on how the grant funding will be used. As part of that, and I will talk about budgeting in just a second, but as part of that, you'll have to get quotes from third-party suppliers to make sure that you're actually budgeting the right amounts. So keep that in mind. Also, in terms of your project, you will have to have that project defined, and you'll have to have a really interesting description on it, including the aims and objectives of the project. You'll always be needing to link back to the grant objectives and the budget, and make sure that if you're describing a project, that it perfectly matches what the funding body's objectives are, and that also matches what you've actually factored into your budget. Okay, so those three things will always have to be aligned. And I find the process is very much back and forth, double checking continually that they are aligned. If you slightly get off track and move away from what the funding body's objectives are, or if you start changing the project a little bit but don't update the budget to factor in some new items that you considered, you can get a little bit off track and it just doesn't make sense for whoever's assessing it at the other end. Okay, budgeting. Budgeting is the next element. When it comes to budgeting, you do have to be careful, because if you're successful, you'll have to spend the funds that you've outlined in the budget. So you'll have to complete a really accurate outline of your program or the project and the costs, and make sure that each of those items on the budget is eligible under the grant that you're applying for as well. So firstly, you have to understand the funding body's requirements before you prepare your project or the program, or research the grant budget. You have to check the format that's required. Now, some funders will allow you to use your own budget template. Others will provide you with a template that incorporates their budget lines and categories, so how they want to see it broken down. But definitely assess the budget side of things and the financial side of things, and really determine what type of expenses are eligible. There may not be all of the expenses that are associated with your budget may not be eligible, but some may be. So you're going to have to work with other organisations or other businesses to determine some costs. So creating a budget for grants does require working with, obviously, as I mentioned, your team members, but also suppliers that will be running various elements of the project. You'll have to figure out their anticipated needs and the associated costs in terms of the project. Also, I'd be really careful in the budgeting sense. There tends to be a long period of time between when a grant application goes in, or when you start doing this budgeting, and when the project can actually take place. So really make sure that that if you are getting any quotes from third-party suppliers, that they are committed to holding that price until the grant is announced. Basically, I would try and get that, because one thing you don't want is to have a fantastic project, go through to suppliers, get quotes on the various elements that they are going to have involvement in. And then when you go to carry out, so you accept, you get the grant, you accept the funding by way of an agreement, and then you go to engage with the supplier, and their costs have suddenly skyrocketed. So you really want the supplier to remain true to that quote and hold that price until you've heard about the actual funding. So yeah, you will need to work with others to determine those costs. Now, to improve your chances of getting this approved or getting it across the line, again, make sure that your grant budget is consistent with the grant objectives and with your project description. So those three elements you'll have to continually realign. You can do this by checking that anything that's in your project description that might have a cost attached to it is reflected in the budget. So that's a really good way to do it. And then you will cross-check that against the objectives. So some costs that you can consider, obviously you've got your direct costs for grants, which are the funds that you're asking for. So personnel, staff costs, there could be travel, it could be purchase of equipment, it could be supplies, which you may need to break down into categories. There could be in-kind contributions like volunteers and that kind of thing, or there could be other, in-kind sort of agreements, and indirect costs, so overheads like lease costs and that kind of thing. So you'll have to consider anything that's related to the project. Now, providing really high quality budget as part of your grant application will really greatly increase the likelihood of it actually getting across the line. But as I mentioned before, it will actually make it a lot easier to carry out this project, because you'll know exactly how much you can spend and what you're going to spend it on. It also helps you prepare your grant reporting or your acquittal faster when it's time to report back to your funder. So keep that in mind. Anything that you are spending, you'll have to justify. So writing a budget for a grant is not like your normal operating budget. It's going to be project specific and linked directly to these objectives. So also keep that in mind. Make it easy for yourself by getting this right in the first instance. All right, some do's and don'ts when it comes to budgeting alone. First of all, don't request more than the maximum amount available because it might make your application actually ineligible. It also will indicate to the panel that you've not read the guidelines properly. So it may mean that you lose a little bit of that professionalism in your application. Also, don't expect a grant to pay for your entire project. Additional contributions from other sources are generally expected. So it could be in-kind support from your organisation. It could be generated income like sales or fees or other grant funding, sponsorships or donations, or you might have to have the actual cash and have proof of match funding. So understand exactly what the rules are there. Also, make sure that you read all the explanatory notes that are included in the budget section of the application form because there will be some information there. Those notes are intended to guide you to actually complete the budget. They also provide examples of the types of income and expenditure items that can be included. I would recommend that you do a draft budget before you transfer it to the actual application form. So do something in Excel and have a play around. If you adjust individual figures, make sure that you're just rechecking the total amounts. Now, some grant applications will just have a fill-in format for the budget items, whereas some will ask you to fill in an Excel template or you'll upload your own. So just understand that, but definitely keep a copy of it in your own Excel document, for example. Don't include GST in your budget figures. So that's just a general no-no unless they've specified that you should, but in most cases, that's not required. Do make sure that you estimate in-kind support so that, and I've touched on this a couple of times, but they're the non-cash items that are potentially donated to your product or given to your product or in exchange for something that you've got. You'll only be able to provide estimates of their value, but they are really important to include because it does show the real cost of the project. Definitely contact the funding body for guidance in completing your budget as well. So make use of those periods of time where you can actually do that, but have a look at all the supporting information as well. Now, another recommendation here is that I would look at doing the expense section of your budget first. Be realistic in what you ask for. Don't underestimate time and cost of the project, but likewise, don't inflate your costs because your assessment committees look carefully at the budget items. Definitely assess the personnel time involved, approach suppliers to verify their costs and availability and get quotes that they're willing to honour once the grant is approved. Make sure that you've considered if there's any travel or accommodation or living allowance involved and assess the cost of materials and equipment hire and that kind of thing as well. So do the expenses, then do the income section. So how much can you apply from that particular grant? Is there any in-kind support that you can source? Are there any cash donations or sponsorship opportunities? Is there any earned income that you could apply to this? And think about what your organisation can afford to contribute to the project. There could be confirmed or unconfirmed income from other grants that you're hoping to use towards the project as well. Now, budgets generally always have to be balanced. So income has to equal expenditure. So if you've completed your budget, and it balances, perfect. You're on to the next step. But if not, make sure that you go back and have a look at it. Now, any item on the budget, again, work backwards here. Once you've completed the budget, go back and go, all right, is this particular item on my budget discussed in the description and does it meet the objectives? So I would suggest doing like a wish list or a maximum budget first, and then work backwards from there based on the level of funding and what you as a business can contribute as well. All right, so writing responses is probably the most time-consuming part. It all takes time. So each step in what we're sort of going through today is just it is time-consuming to get it right. So in terms of writing your response, make sure that you write in accordance with the application guidelines. So answer the specific question, but thoroughly read and understand those questions before you start to answer them. Even get someone else's opinion. So how do you interpret this question? How would you answer this question? And that's a really good reason, just going back as we touched on, having a bit of a brainstorm. That's a great reason to have a brainstorm. Have a chat amongst yourselves as to just how you answer that question. Provide really clear and detailed descriptions of how the proposal is going to be implemented, as well as the description of your organisation or your business. In that description, you have to establish your credibility and your qualifications as a business or as individuals for the funding. So with the project, really clearly define the aims and objectives, outline how the objectives will be achieved, and outline how the success of the program or the project is going to be measured as well. Obviously, and I've said this a million times, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's so important, link the proposed outcomes or the projected deliverables to the benefit to the community or the target group and the amount of funding. So outline the long-term benefits of the project to obviously the business, but also the community in terms of creation of jobs, preservation of existing jobs in the region that you're operating, and demonstrate how the proposal is going to benefit the target group. Obviously, you have to identify and demonstrate an awareness of the specific needs of the target group and the community. Okay, so produce that evidence and up-to-date and accurate data based on objective research and the needs of the target groups and the location that you're operating in as well. So this is like marketing, defining your target market essentially. You have to write factually, and the information you submit has to be accurate because it might be audited. So you have to be bold and positive, but don't be too exaggerated in terms of the claims that you're making. Provide evidence to support the application wherever you can. So if you're saying there's a demonstrated need for this project, this business, this new product, whatever it might be in the particular region that you operate, do you have evidence to back that up? And also show where the proposal fits into the funders' priorities. So always link back to those objectives. Now, an important tip I think here in terms of writing responses is check the funding body's website and have a look if the funding has existed before. You'll see who has been successful for that funding. So get a feel for who is likely or who has been approved in the past and what sort of project are likely to be funded. So have a thorough read of that, have a look at any information, their descriptions, go onto those businesses' websites as well, and just see what information you can find there, because it really does help you in terms of getting a feel for what the funding body is sort of, or what sort of projects are appealing to them. All right, your writing style is also really important. In some cases, you will have an open document that you'll develop yourself, and other times it's a fill-in format. Sometimes you'll have a limited number of words, which can be really difficult. If you like to write and you've got a lot to say in a big project, having, being limited to 300, 400, 500 words can be really difficult. So understand that side of it first, then set out your document structure. And have a logical sequence using the same headings that the questions are that they're asking, so that they can directly link your answers. Be succinct in your answer, using really simple and concise language. Don't use waffle or repetition too much. If it's appropriate and you have to repeat information, that's okay, as long as you're not just copying and paste those same paragraphs or sentences and just repeating them. Just tailor the answer to what the question is that's being asked, even if the content is repeated, if that makes sense. Just keep in mind that someone has to read this and they have to read many other applications as well. So as pleasant as that experience can be for the assessor, the easier it is for them to assess your grant application as well. Also include a short project title that's creative and interesting, and a description of the aims and activities, which is similar to an executive summary if you have the ability to do so. So keep in mind, as I mentioned, some will be more of an open format application, others will have a set boxes where you complete based on a maximum number of words. So you might not be able to submit an executive summary, for example. Also, repeat key messages. Like I said earlier, I said avoid repetition, but repeat key messages. That is using persuasive techniques. So you have to reinforce that message to the assessor to make sure that they do understand. But as long as it's articulated well and relevant to the section that you're repeating the information in. Definitely have a professional layout with consistent fonts. You might want to use graphics and like things like tables, charts, diagrams. Obviously, photos really help to generate a picture of what it is that you're trying to achieve. But headings are really important to draw the assessor's eyes to different areas, subheadings to break up content as well. Keep your paragraphs nice and short. You might want to use bullet points if you think it's appropriate, but just make sure things like your fonts are consistent, your margins are decent, and that you've got a nice layout and design in the case that you've got that free format sort of design. In the case that it's being uploaded to a portal where you've just got the words to complete, you're a bit limited in that sense. Definitely avoid using any vague, any speculative or any overly emotive words. So things like I believe, I hope, I expect, I may, I could, I might. Those kind of words are a bit they're not as strong as a clear statement that has some evidence to back up what's being said. So keep that in mind. Try not to be vague. All right, some do's and don'ts again. Do absolutely tailor your application for a specific grant. Now, it is tempting to take some work that you've spent weeks and weeks on and just repeat it, copy paste for a different grant application if you're applying for a few. However, each grant is going to have a different criteria that you will need to meet. It's designed for a specific purpose, so your application will have to be specific to the particular funding that you're applying for. Do definitely address all eligibility criteria and answer every application question. If there's a question that's not relevant to your business, you might not be ready to apply for that particular grant yet. Be succinct, yet thorough, and answer all questions that you can. But if you aren't able to answer a question, you might need to go away and do some more work on that, or you might not be ready. But rather than guessing it or leaving it blank, get yourself informed on that particular area. Definitely have a grant strategy. It really helps to know which grants you might be eligible for. Make sure that you're really active in applying for these ahead of time. It means that you can map out the application timeline, because we know that this is the most extensive part of applying for a grant. And then you can systematically address each grant application. Definitely consider specific projects instead of the business as a whole. And I said that right at the beginning. Most grants are awarded for specific business activities like productive development. It could be import and export agreements. It could be recruitment and training of staff. So, it's really important that you do look at it on a project base. So, as an example, something like a technology startup is most likely eligible for grants, but not only because its products or services meet certain criteria. So it's not just that it's a technology startup, it's that it's ticking a few boxes from a government perspective. So also keep that in mind as well. Don't apply for grants that you're unlikely to get. Now, a proper grant application takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I wouldn't bother spending that time and effort unless you're quite certain that you're going to get that grant. Don't assume that a good startup with a good idea is enough. Don't assume anything when it comes to grant applications, but grants and government business assistance are awarded for fulfillment of specific requirements that varies from grant to grant, and having a good idea is typically not one of those. So keep in mind that you have to, delve a little bit further into that. Also, another don't that I would say is don't not follow up. So there's a lot of startups and small business grants available. It's possible that grant applications will become a regular part of your operation or a regular part of your business. So think about the long term and follow up on grants even if you're unsuccessful, or in particular, if you're unsuccessful. Ask the grant administrator how you could improve your application for next time and how you might have better addressed certain eligibilities. That kind of information, that feedback is really important. A lot of the time you can get feedback by way of just a discussion and booking in a meeting with the funding body. They will not, 9 times out of 10, I've not found anyone that won't give you that information yet. Keep in mind, you can also use professional grant writers if that's something that you have, you're financially able to do. It can improve your chances. It can help save you time. It can really just get you across the line in terms of grant strategy. But definitely ask about their experience, ask about their success in the past. Don't be afraid to shop around and get a few different prices and speak to a few different people. It can be helpful to find a grant writer that specialises in your industry or in the particular grant that you're applying for as well. So definitely keep that in mind. Also, I will just say that if you are using a grant writer, do keep in mind that they are going to need a lot of time and information from you. So you're still going to have a lot of input in that sense as well. Okay, some top tips here. Keep in mind, grant writing is not an easy feat, especially when you're faced with a large application process that you might need, a lot of supporting documentation and a lot of evidence and that kind of thing. There might be funding opportunities for you, and there could be lots of different funding opportunities. So the more you do it, the easier it's going to be. So keep that in mind. Do make the document really easily understood by an assessor and make it engaging for the assessor. Like I said earlier, a grants reviewer or an assessor might need to be assessing, or most likely is assessing, several applications. It could be in the hundreds, who knows, but a clear application, if yours is a clear application that really sets the scene for a case that's got enthusiasm, but it's well researched, you've got evidence to back up any statements made, you really drive points home and stand out among other applicants. You have to write for someone that might not have any understanding of your industry or your business. They might have limited time, so just make sure any ideas are clear and concise. Don't lose your passion in that process by just bullet pointing everything. Bullet pointing doesn't give you the ability to add much personality to your application, but do just make sure that it is clear and well researched. It's up-to-date data in there as well. Yeah, absolutely. Convince that assessor that your project or idea is exciting and worthy of that funding. So making it engaging is really important there. Definitely answer all questions in full. Like I said earlier, if you can't answer a question, there's probably something in that that you should look at. Definitely revise your application, and revise a lot. Your goal is to develop a really clear and concise application that communicates your project or idea effectively and passionately. So things like spelling or grammar errors, any waffling sentences or sentences that are too long perhaps, or vague ideas, can really impact the overall grant application. So get a fresh set of eyes, get someone to come in and have a look and have a read over. And I think that can really help you address any areas that you might have left out. You become so close to your project that you may know things and forget to actually state them. So keep that in mind. Don't hesitate to hand that application over to someone that you trust just for editing, if nothing else. Take on board their feedback and then rewrite it if you have to. I'd also highly recommend, as probably the biggest tip for today, is submit your application ahead of time. So submit the application as per the guidelines, however that might be, whether it's online or email attachments, but don't leave it to the last minute. You might encounter some unexpected errors, or it could be that everyone's submitting last minute. So systems and uploads are slow or glitching and that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that stress can play absolute havoc with you. So you don't want to miss out on any element because you're under too much pressure to get it in by a time frame. So don't rush. All right, now we're going to talk about some specific grants and where you can find more information. So keep in mind, as I mentioned, grants are mostly match funding, but there are also things like rebates. There's subsidies, there's incentive schemes like the tax offsets, there's training and development, there's advisory and mentoring services like the Digital Solutions Program that I'm presenting on behalf of. There's also low interest loans. So there's a range of different forms of assistance. By way of grants, at the moment, we've got, or had lockdown assistance grants. So the small business lockdown assistance grants program was giving businesses, I think, around $2,000 to $3,000. And that was in the Perth and Peel region in Western Australia, but there's others for other states and territories. And that's if you're impacted by lockdowns and the restrictions associated with that. So always, if there's ever a COVID lockdown, have a look out for any grant assistance that might be relevant there. There's the Export Market Development Grant. Now, this is 50% support of eligible export promotion expenses over and above that $5,000. And this is for new or current exporters. So the Export Market Development Grants is a really key Australian government financial assistance program. Now, each year it helps around 4,000 small and medium businesses to start to expand their business by way of exporting. Now, it has recently changed and it's now a lot more flexible and it's responsive to the needs of businesses. So it's going to be a lot simpler for applicants. It now does give a lot greater certainty about how much funding grantees will receive. So keep in mind, it used to be retrospective. So you used to have to spend the money and then apply for it back at the end of the financial year. Now it's reoriented from that reimbursement model to a grants application program, so much simpler application process and rules. And it's basically looking at those people who export or expand or making any strategic shifts in the business. You get that upfront funding, so you've got certainty, which specifies the amount that they will fund over 2 or 3 years. So it has really expanded for those looking to export for the first time as well. So definitely keep that in mind. There's the Small to Medium Enterprise Recovery Loan Scheme, which is government guarantees on loans. Now, those loans can be secured or unsecured. You still look at those loans through your bank. That one's been going from April, but it ends on the 31st of December. So time is very limited in terms of making use of that. So keep that one in mind. Now, there's also the Boosting Female Founders Grant application. Now, that's for businesses that have 51% or more female, 51% or more female founded, I should say. This one's into its second or third round, which has recently closed, but they will open another one in March. So keep an eye out for that. Then there's a lot of industry-specific grants. So there's Indigenous tourism, there's business events, there's the COVID-19 consumer travel support grants, there's regional development grants as well. So there's a lot of industry-specific grants too. All right, so that's just an overview of some of the ones that exist at the moment, but I'm going to go through all the resource areas and the business and grants programs section. So keep in mind there is a fantastic grant finder tool that you can use to see what grants you might be eligible for. So if you go on to that grants and programs, so it's on your screen at the moment, business.gov.au/grants and programs. You will answer a few questions in there and then it will display results that are relevant to how you answer those questions. There's also Grant Connect. Government grant, the government grant information system. That's a centralised publication of future and current Australian government grant opportunities. It also tells you what grants have been awarded. So that's a really interesting thing to look at as well. You've got Self-Start. Self-Start is there to support small business owners through the first stage of starting their own business. So it can be anything from planning and validating the idea, to finding local support and even perfecting your pitch there. So that site contains information and links to existing resources, and there's about 11 different topic areas there, so keep that in mind. COVID-19 assistance packages. Now that's the latest government financial assistance and support for all Australian businesses. So keep an eye out for that one. That obviously varies state to state as well. Okay, Export Market Development Grant, we've spoken about, but that is the link to actually get information there. just keep in mind, like I said, that is now grant funding that you can apply for upfront as opposed to being retrospective. So that's a huge benefit. Also keep in mind that tourism businesses are considered export if you're advertising to international visitors to get them into Australia. So if you're another type of business and you're genuinely exporting products, obviously you're eligible there, but tourism, getting people into the country is considered export there as well. Then you've got the research and development tax incentive. So the R&D tax incentive helps companies to innovate and to grow by offsetting some of the costs of eligible research and development. So this one really encourages investment in research and development to help individual businesses grow and innovate. And that obviously has benefits to the Australian economy. But there's financial support, but they also offer that opportunity to collaborate with research service providers as well. So a couple of good benefits there. Landing pads is another really interesting one. This is for market-ready Australian startups and scale-ups. It basically gives you access to some of the world's most renowned hubs. So they've got hubs in San Francisco, Tel Aviv, Shanghai, Berlin, and Singapore. And the program actually provides you with an operational base and customized support for your overseas expansion in one of those areas. But because there's no travel at the moment, they're only accepting future applications. So definitely if it's something that you're looking at in the future, certainly get on board there. Now, other things to keep an eye out for are networking events, other individual smaller grants that may be available through smaller regions or obviously your state government, but even local government and local shires as well. Business advisory services are fantastic. The one that we are working with at the moment is the Digital Solutions Program. I'll tell you a bit more about that at the moment, but that's a Commonwealth initiative. So that one's a really good one. Obviously, there's other newsletters that you can keep an eye out for and find information. And there's a lot of data and research information that are available from these government organisations as well that will help not only with your grant application, but help grow your business by identifying opportunities. Now, I'd highly recommend that you do work through the various websites that I've mentioned to identify grant opportunities. It should be a process of elimination. You should consider all opportunities and then go through and work out what you're not eligible for. Also, please keep in mind that you should only ever access government grants through government websites. Beware of imitations or any kind of scams. So official government websites have a .gov.au suffix. Don't trust any other websites for anything other than information. You never ever have to pay a fee to apply for a grant or get grant information. So if you're paying for access, then you're being scammed. So keep that in mind. And there are a few out there that will try and charge you a bit of a fee to give you some information. Perhaps they've developed some top tips for applying or something like that. But you shouldn't need that kind of thing. You should be able to work through all of the supporting information that the relevant government organisation supplies to you. All right, so that wraps up this session on grants for small businesses specifically. I will stay on now to answer any questions, so please feel free to shoot any questions through if you have them. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you do apply for grants and any other assistance. As I mentioned, the Digital Solutions Program offers personalised business mentorship, and I also like to think of it as professional development for small business owners and employees in small businesses. So you can get access to that program. It's only $44, so it's heavily subsidised by the Commonwealth Government. That gives you 3 one-on-one sessions with our range of advisors, and we've got over 18 specialist advisors that will cover topics in a digital sense. So anything from social media and digital marketing, online security and data privacy, websites and selling online, as well as using business software and other things like grants, like we've been talking about today. So definitely keep that in mind. There is some eligibility requirements. You have to have an ABN. To register through Business Station, you have to be in WA, Queensland or NT, and you have to be operating for profit. So you don't have to be profitable as yet, but you can't be a not-for-profit. and you have to employ fewer than 20 full-time staff. So if that's something that you're interested in, the registration link is on your screen now. Consider that. And good luck with your grant application process. I hope that you do have the confidence to apply and that you're successful. Please reach out if you have any questions at all. As I mentioned, I'll stay on now to answer any questions, but I hope to speak to you again soon. Thanks again for your time.